Empower Radio presents The Farka Files, an exploration of energy, metaphysics, and the paranormal with David Franklin Farkas. The Farka Files. The truth is in here somewhere. Here's your host, David Franklin Farkas.
Good evening. At least it's evening here. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. Thank you one and all for being here and hanging out. My guest tonight is Star Wolf, and we're going to talk about her new book, Soul Whispering. But first, of course, tonight's metaphysical musing. And not surprisingly, if you're paying attention to this stuff, I'm once again going to talk about the effect of all kinds of things on how sensitive people feel. We happen to have lots of stuff going on. So for me today, it was hard to get anything done. It was just a day of not feeling grounded, not being able to focus, not being able to get much of anything done. And that happens, especially when, let's see, yesterday was the new moon. Tomorrow is the equinox. Today is Rosh Hashanah, which is the first day of the Jewish High Holy Days. L'Shana Tova to anyone who is observing, but you wouldn't be listening if you were. We've got, the fourth or fifth hurricane coming through, and all of the chaos and emotions from that stuff that's happening. Most people in our hemisphere have heard about the Mexican earthquake, but there were similar earthquakes in Japan and New Zealand. And, there is so much going on the planet, and so much going on emotionally by all the people that are being impacted by the stuff that's going on. And what we all try to do is what back in Brooklyn we call just doing my sidewalk act. I'm just walking down the street looking like nothing's going on, and it's a normal day and I'm fine. Well, most of us are not fine. Most of us are being affected by this in various different ways. For some people, your body hurts. For some people, it's being very tired. For other people, it's confusion or brain fog or lots of other things. And a lot of those symptoms are the symptoms of autoimmune diseases. So people get freaked out and think they're getting sick. I was like, no, you probably aren't getting sick. You're just sensitive enough that all this stuff is affecting you. And most people don't pay attention to it. I had someone say, I don't know why everybody's really grouchy the last 2 weeks. Let me tell you what's been going on for the last 2 weeks. So everybody on the planet is being affected one way or another. Most people have no idea that this affects you. And most people are not paying attention, but also aren't so sensitive to it that it's overwhelming. But there it is. There's a lot going on. So drink a lot of water because all of this is very dehydrating. Do whatever grounding processes and exercises you do. Sleep more because your body needs it. And all of this craziness I would say it'll pass, but it'll just turn into some other kind of craziness because that's the period that we're living in. And we will all do just fine. So just another reminder of everything that's going on the planet right now. And that's tonight's metaphysical musing or weather report or whatever it was. And now let's have some fun with Star Wolf. Thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure, David.
So we've actually been Facebook friends for a very long time. So I see the stuff that you post. I'm sure you see the stuff that I post. And I was very excited when the information about the new book showed up, and I had this opportunity to meet you. So thank you so much for being here. The first question I always ask guests is, what was your walk about? How did your life unfold in such a way that you were doing this powerful shamanic work and writing books and doing all the other stuff that you're involved in now?
Well, when someone asks me that, David, I always have to laugh and say, well, it started a long, long time in a far, far away land in western Kentucky where I was born. And I really do have to go that far back because
Hmm.
I feel like I had a very shamanic childhood. I was probably what they would refer to now as a crystal child or an indigo
Hmm.
child. And, I really do believe that most children are that actually, and they lose it fairly quickly. But for some
Yes.
reason, I didn't. And it was a difficult time being an only child, being that kind of child. But I had a grandmother that loved me dearly, and who was very much kind of a Earth Witch Baptist, Celtic renegade Baptist. And she took me under her wing and took my shoes off and put me in the chicken yard with the chickens and, had me planting gardens and talking to trees and, picking up the box turtles out of the woods and those kinds of things. And that she really helped me ground as a child. And she told me stories that I realize now, we call them fairy tales, but they're really mythological stories. And she told me the older kind, the Grimm's brother fairy tales that had both shadow and light to them. And
Right.
they were a little scary. And she'd tell me out at night sitting in the swing in the dark as we looked up at the stars. And she talked about our star brothers and sisters. Then on Sunday we would go to church and, sing hymnals and then come back and pray to the fairies and to Jesus to help our crops grow. And so, I had this kind of, and we believed in fairies, and I remember in my mind, I remember seeing those fairies as a child, and not just in a more of a visionary way, but really in a very visceral way. And so that was the childhood, but the shamanic piece that happened was when my grandmother passed very suddenly when I was 12. And this was in 1964, and it was right at the epoch of drug, sex, and rock and roll. It was the Beatles had come over. The Rolling Stones were being the bad boys. At that time, the Beatles were being the good boys. I got bad later on.
Right.
But,
Except for the hair.
That's right. and it went from 1950s to black and white to all of a sudden in the 60s Technicolor, and really everything was psychedelic. So, the first chapter in our book, and my co-author is Nita Gage, my best friend, and we've worked together for years. And but she and I both laugh about it. And when we were first talking about this subject matter, we said, well, we were baby boomers, but we were really shamans. And I laughed out loud. I said, well, from baby boomers to shamans. And that's really the truth. I think a lot of us during that era were budding shamans. The world, we talk about it being turned upside down now, and it really is. And the world is smaller now because of technology. But the world has always been turned upside down in many ways. And it was very turned upside down during the 60s. And to be a teenager, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, during that time was incredible. And, it was an amazing time to be alive and to be in that spirit and that energy where it seemed like anything was possible. And, of course, you added a little psychedelic research to that, field research, of course. Then everything really was possible. And some people thought they could literally fly, and, of course, they didn't make it. And that led, of course, then into the, mid-70s, early 80s. For me, a time of trying to ground all that energy. I started a family. I went to work as a social worker. I started working primarily in the mental health system and facing some of my own addictions, specializing with other people with mental illnesses and addictions. And that's a very shamanic world. To have addiction and to work with people with addiction is extremely shamanic because nobody really wants to be an addict or an alcoholic that I've ever met. They might say, oh, let's party, but nobody really wants to lose control and be taken over by a substance of any kind or anything, whether it's pornography or, eating or anything in that way. And through doing some of my own inner healing and transformation during that time and being able to really do personal growth work, as I said before, it was more of an experimental thing in my teens and then in the 60s. But in the 70s and 80s, I really did a lot of inner work and was assisting a lot of other people in more of a mainstream field. But I was never a mainstream girl, and I was always sneaking things in on the side, like meditation. You had to sneak meditation, believe it or not, and guided imagery into the mental health system because I thought that was too weird and too wacky.
Yeah.
Now that that's changed, a lot of that's changed, but at that time I was always the weird one from childhood through adolescence to young adulthood. And then finally, to be honest with you, in my early 30s, I just kind of, in some ways, reverted back to my teens in the sense that I just stopped caring. Had been inside the system, and I realized that the system was so limited with the kind of healing that it was doing. There were some great counselors, there were some good things happening, but I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt there was more. Having experienced that as a child, as a teenager, and kind of being afraid of it at some point because it, got out of hand, and I lost friends through addiction, things like that. But when I started opening up to this world again of the super nature or the supernatural, it automatically led me into three main fields, really. The first was breath work, and I started doing breath work, which I'll say more about in a moment. The second was shamanism, and the third was Jungian psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And those three really came together in a perfect triage, this perfect integration, and had this powerful truth for me that this healing energy, and I know you know this, David, that this healing energy is inside of all of us, and that we just need the keys to unlock that. And so I began using breath work and other shamanic tools, and then eventually birthed shamanic breath work. And, of course, called in the whole archetypal world and a lot of Jung's work. I did a lot of study with that and a lot of experimentation with that work and inner work. And that kind of brought me to where I am today, really. That was in my mid-30s, and that's been a few years ago. But that's really the path that set me on my path pretty firmly. And from that time, of course, I've learned many things. I've, evolved myself and my work 100 times over. And at the same time, that's really my foundation.
There are a lot of parallels, and where I'm a little bit older than you are, but not very much. So I remember all those periods of time and was on a vaguely similar path. So I can totally appreciate that. And then at some point, you're doing things that nobody else is doing or understands.
Yes.
Which is always, now what do I do? So obviously what you did was create systems and methods and all kinds of things. So you have a new book, and I want to hear more about it. But the book is based on your way of integrating shamanism and psychiatry, which I think is fascinating. So tell us more about that.
Well, as I said before, coming out of the 60s and having a lot of confusion, I went into therapy myself, and then I went into also my own recovery around certain substances, and I was just really diving into mysticism. And as I cleared out my own system more and my own psyche more of what we refer to as the paranormal or whatever really began to happen in my life. And as that occurred, as a child, my grandmother had helped those things ground within me and helped me feel normal. But whenever I would ever talk to anybody as a child outside of my grandmother, they would say, "Oh, you're weird," and or in the 7th and 8th grade, the teenage girls, because I could, we would play with tarot cards or Ouija boards or different things, and I would come up with things that were really happening, and they would go, "Oh, you're like a witch," and that sort of thing. And of course, today I acknowledge the Wicca and the witches, but I personally have not seen myself as a witch, although a lot of people probably have. Uh, but, there's a way in which who I am, I believe I have this natural leaning towards being shamanic. And, in the indigenous world, persons like yourself, myself, who have certain abilities, they're automatically, instead of being shunned as a child or shamed or thought as weird, you're seen as special. And thank God my grandmother was the one who saw me as special. But that's why it was such a blow to me when she passed, because then I didn't have anybody else who saw that for a long time. And of course, eventually, we're the ones that have to see it ourselves and say, this is who I am and this is good.
Right.
But, it's a struggle sometimes because we want other people to love us. And so, it feels like sometimes, that the love is based on fitting in and being normal. And that's not easy when you're not particularly normal, nor is it the desirous to be normal, in the sense of what somebody's asking you to be, which is to not be yourself and to have your special gifts. So, in my 20s and 30s, as I really began to own the gifts that I have and see them as important and that I could use them. I remember when I worked in the field of mental health and prior to having an advanced degree, I worked as a daycare worker for the mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
And the psychiatrist would come in and visit them for 30 minutes, the folks, whereas I was with them every day, all day long. And it would come in, and talk to them and not understand what was going on. And then I would sit and I would talk, with them right beside the psychiatrist. And then I would turn around and I would completely interpret what had happened and what they just said and what it meant and what the symbology was. And, and he'd go like, where did you get that? And I said, well, I just really paid attention. And I'm intuitive about this. And of course, the person I'm sitting with is going, yes, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about, And I realized that the psychiatrist and some of my colleagues actually were quite impressed with me and what I was doing. And as long as I didn't get too out there, you know what I mean? Don't get too out there with this,
Right.
And so as long as we kept it under wraps a little bit, it was okay. And I remember the director of one facility I worked at, just 2 or 3 years before I finally said, I'm really tired of hiding who I am, came and knocked on my door and came in and said to me, all the patients you're working with are doing so well. Their families are pleased and they're doing so well. But I need you to stop doing whatever it is you're doing because, we can't allow that to happen here at the mental health center. And then he kind of winked at me and he said, or at least don't let anybody know what you're doing, And, it doesn't seem that extravagant now. I would hold people's hands. I would hug them. I'd have them do art. I'd have them listen to some music. I'd have them breathe while they were sitting and listening to the music and maybe do a guided imagery or to get some symbolism. It doesn't seem that strange at this moment. But at that time, it was quite revolutionary in Madisonville, Kentucky, and also in Spring Hill, Florida.
Right.
So, for me, I appreciate the world of psychology and psychiatry, and I have many friends, actually, who work in those fields. And quite frankly, over the past 25 years, I've had a lot of psychologists, a few psychiatrists, and lots of therapists and nurses and social workers come through my training program. So, they're finding a way to integrate this. And they'll say to me sometimes, how do I take this back? And I'll say, let me tell you something. If I could take this back and sneak it in to those systems 25, 35 years ago, you can find a way to do this.
Right.
So that's really where my background came in. And so my friend Nita, who is also the past director of the American Board of Holistic Medicine, she did the same thing in the medical world. She started sneaking things in, and in fact, every year for about 14 years, she took a group of doctors off to Molokai and would do breath work with them and do some of these kinds of things, and she called it Physician Heal Thyself. And her program was always full with doing that kind of work. And so we just really have, between the two of us, we probably have about 70 or 75 years of working in the mental health field, the addictions field, the medical field, the psychological, psychiatric field, as well as working in the world in private practice. I left the institutions as far as working for them more than 30 years ago. But, the interesting thing, David, is that when you walk away from some of those places, they hire you to come back as a consultant.
That's right. And they pay you more.
And they pay you more. They definitely pay you more. So, to work with the psyche is a natural thing to do if you're a shaman or a shamanic being, and to really bring that energy to individuals who are struggling, is the gift that we have.
Yeah, it's the run-of-the-mill psych stuff, especially in an institution, is so limited, and the expectations of the patients are so limited that anything, that's a very big deal. I worked in both residential treatment as a shop teacher and as staff on locked psych units, and watched what was going on. And, I was, as a teacher, I had a lot of influence and I had a lot of time with the kids I was working with. But when you're floor staff, nobody listens to you.
Right.
And it was very interesting, very, very interesting. Of course, my side of it was when somebody had voices, I could see who the voices were. And the doctors don't have within their worldview that stuff can be real. So you can't even talk to them about it. But it was, while I was doing my shamanic walkabout and doing my studying with my teachers, I was also working nights in a psych hospital, and the combination was very interesting, integrating the two sides of it.
It is amazing, isn't it? I'm not really surprised, but how many of us who came out of the 60s and the 70s and came out of that era, I really do feel like the baby boomers who became shamans, and that was the seeding of that and that awakening of that at that time. And then so many of us in the 70s and 80s ended up working in psych units.
Right.
It was kind of like we either had to be a patient or treat them, or both,
Right.
And really for that deeper seeking of what was in the psyche, what's in our souls, and, what causes us to go off the deep end or to get lost in between the worlds. And then after going into that world, then once again making the next evolution to saying, this is too limiting and there's not enough here to help the individuals who are trapped in between the worlds. Right. And of course, the definition for the shaman, one of the definitions, is a walker between the worlds.
Right. Right. And watching somebody, I watched a lot of people who, had they been in another culture, would have been noticed as children and would have been trained and would have been respected practitioners. And they got older and they were just eccentric, crazy ladies that suddenly couldn't take care of themselves. And it was extremely frustrating and sad to know that what was seen as the problem was a skill that they could have used to help other people.
Yeah. In other countries, they would call that, like in India, they would call it crazy wisdom.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking of some of the gurus. Yeah.
I want to make sure people know. I want to make sure people know where to find you online.
Sure.
What's your website?
Yeah, it's shamanicbreathwork.org, and our organization is called Venus Rising Association for Transformation, and we train people in shamanic breathwork. We ordain shamanic ministers, and we award degrees from our university, bachelor's and master's and doctorate degrees, and affiliation with the University of North Carolina.
Wow. I want to hear more about that. That sounds very exciting. Very exciting. So we're going to go to a break. And as I always say, we will be back shortly if we don't get taller. Um, my guest tonight is Starwolf, and we are going to be talking more about this fascinating work that she does on the book that just came out. This is David Franklin Farkas on Empower Radio. Don't go nowhere. We'll be right back, and we're going to have more fun.
The Empower Meditation Channel. Non-stop meditation music 24 hours a day in the new Empower Radio app. Music to empower your meditation, help you relax, sleep, or provide a calm background while you work. The Empower Meditation Channel is interruption-free. Listen now with the Empower Radio app, free in the App Store, or listen online at empower.fm. Soothe your soul, calm your mind. The Empower Meditation Channel.
Let's go, guys!
Hey, did you guys know that kids who play sports earn more money when they grow up?
Of course. I knew that.
Hey, did you guys know that kids who read books have a bigger vocabulary?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Wow, Jinx. Did you guys know that friendly children have more friends?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's true. I knew that. Did you guys know that winter babies are better at music?
Everyone knows that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
obvious.
Oh, hey, guys, did you know that most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Huh, I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure I knew that.
I'm pretty sure you didn't.
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right car seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Did you know that 7 in 10 girls believe they are not good enough or don't measure up in some way? I'm Amy Poehler. You may know me from film and television, but I'm also involved off-screen, encouraging young girls to be proud of who they are. Body image breakdowns and the pressure to be perfect often causes a girl's self-esteem to plummet. But by being positive role models, we can change that. The number one wish among girls is for their parents to communicate better with them, including more frequent and more open conversations. So get involved and start talking. Begin a conversation with a girl in your life about the importance of self-esteem. Tell her why she is beautiful and set an example by avoiding negative self-talk. You can make a difference in the lives of girls, and that is no laughing matter.
This message was brought to you by American Women in Radio and Television and was made possible through the generous support of the Dove Self-Esteem Fund, working together to raise self-esteem in girls everywhere. To learn more, go to campaignforrealbeauty.com. Thank you for making a difference.
Today, you ate Greek yogurt. You took the train. You wondered why people spend so much time reading celebrity blogs. You read a celebrity blog. You planned a workout. You skipped it. You did all the things that one normally does the day before a devastating earthquake shakes the community to the ground. You never know when the day before is the day before. Prepare for tomorrow at ready.gov/today. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
Radio to inspire, encourage, and empower you. This is Empower Radio.
Now back to the Farkas Files with David Franklin Farkas on Empower Radio.
And we're back with my guest Starwolf, and we're talking about her new book and her fascinating work. But I'm really curious about your university offering degrees in all of this. That's amazing.
Well, you know something, David? It is amazing. For being a little girl who people said, you're weird, you're strange, we don't want to talk to you, or, we're afraid of you, to living in the mountains here outside of Asheville in western North Carolina, moving here from San Francisco in 2003, and developing my programs further from being, mainly workshops, and we were already doing training for breath work, but developing it to a status to where people could actually come through our programs and get degrees was quite a feat. And also getting, when you create a nonprofit, you have to, for whatever reason, it sounds strange, I know, but a nonprofit, has to be, especially a spiritual nonprofit, has to be approved by the IRS. Mm-hmm. And so I had to, along with my administrative help, convince, it took about 2 or 3 years to convince the IRS and the to accept our organization as a proper ordainment board for ministers. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to be able, for one reason, because, going back to what I said before, of working in the mental health center, people saying, you can do that, but don't let us know you're doing it. Okay? And that doesn't feel right when this feels like that it's more the healing work that really helps or that can help. So I said, I'm not going to hide. I'm going to come out of the closet. I'm going to bring this stuff out of the closet. And so we persevered and with our legal rights to become an ordainment board so that our people who came through and did the training they needed to do in order to learn how to work with people who were going through the kind of things you were talking about, but anything, from a divorce to hearing voices, whatever it might be, and that they could have a minister's license to minister to others. And not just any minister's license. We're actually, as far as I know, the only ordainment board for shamanic ministry. And then after we did that, we decided, because we trained so many people and they wanted to start trainings in their areas, and they said, we'd like to use this training. We went back to the same institute that had allowed us to become ordainment board and said, we want to have other spiritual centers. And they said, well, that would be called congregations. So we have, I think at this point, I'll have to check because I think two new ones came on board. I believe we have 14 different congregations around the country right now. Some are very operational, and some are, just mainly doing private practice. And then after that, we went to the university here in North Carolina because UNC, because they're the ones who, when we checked in and said, how can we get college credit for the people who come through our studies? They really deserve it. I mean, many of the people we have come through, to be honest with you, already have a bachelor's. Most of them have a master's, and some have a doctorate. We had some who had doctorates from Harvard, from Stanford, from Boston. And we said, we have really amazing people that come through, but they would like to have a degree with our programs, and they certainly earn it. And it took us about 2 years, and again, exercising our legal rights with what we were doing, improving what we were doing was credit worthy. And so in 2010, we became a university in the state of North Carolina. We are a non-accredited university, like all the universities in Europe, and many across this country are non-accredited, which doesn't mean that we train any less, but it does mean, that there's certain things that we don't have to answer to for accreditation. Right. And at the same time, I would say about 80% of the people that come through really don't ever have to prove to anybody that their bachelor's or master's or doctorate came from the accredited, quote, university. So, most of the people that really do our programs are really empowered individuals creating their own businesses anyway. And we do have some chaplains that, people that go out and work in hospitals and stuff as ministers and things like that. But, so we have quite a few people who graduated from our university. We're very proud of it. And it's called Venus Rising University for Shamanic Psycho-Spiritual Studies.
Well, it sounds very exciting, and at some point after the show, I will ask you to point me to the information and talk to you about it.
Sure.
Because, it's something that I've thought about at various times, but I know a lot of people who do amazing work, and the credentials would make a big difference.
That's right.
Because it opens doors, because it's...
it really does.
Yeah, being able to say that you're ordained and that there's something behind that, being able to say that you have a degree, makes a huge difference for some circumstances, for many circumstances, actually.
Well, one of my goals, if you would say, I don't know what else to call it, and maybe dreams. Dreams feels even better, but it is a goal, is that people can recognize that shamanic studies are valid studies, and that to study that, in years gone by, people thought psychology was not a valid study. That's more the last 100 years or the last 150 years. Prior to that, it wasn't seen as a valid study. So to me, bringing into people's consciousness what shaman truly means, which for me means the natural world. My prescription, if someone came to me who was depressed, one of the first things I would prescribe for them is to go walk in nature.
Right.
And to go sit by a tree and to lean against a tree and to put their feet into the brook next to the tree and to notice the creatures around them, and then to take their journal and to let one of the creatures speak to them and tell them what they needed to do with their life, and to notice the cloud formations and if it took on a familiar image of something they've been thinking about, and to look for the world of synchronicities. In other words, to reconnect them with their own natural healing. That's what shamanism really is.
Mm-hmm.
To reconnect people with their own super nature, their own ability to heal themselves in nature.
And also support them in being different, and which allows them to grow into the things that they might otherwise be afraid of.
Yes, that's so true. That's so true. Most people are sensitive. I heard you talking about that earlier, about if you're sensitive. And I was thinking, for me, it's not so disturbing and sad that people are so sensitive. I'm one of those sensitive people, too. I'm very empathic. What's more disturbing is people who aren't sensitive.
Right.
People who've gotten so blocked and so jaded, from fast food to the violence in movies to whatever it might be in their lives, to the traffic, to what we accept, quote, as normal, that the jadedness is there, that they're so blocked that they don't feel it when 150 people die in Mexico. Right. I didn't know about it at first, but I felt literally like I had flu symptoms that day.
Right.
Which when then I read about it and did some smudging and some praying and some correcting within myself, totally went away. Not, I still allow myself to feel the grief and the sadness, and to, say, what can I do, to support those people, or, to support the world at this time. But it's not something we want to take on. But it's also, I think there's something wrong when people don't know, when they don't feel it.
Well, the mainstream culture is about distraction.
Yes.
So if your world is about, watching whichever version of addictive TV you happen to like, sports or reality shows or whatever it is, and hanging out with your friends being rowdy and drinking beer, or whatever version of that you happen to do, you look forward to that. That's what makes everything worthwhile and takes up your time. So thinking about broader issues is not even in there, and may not be in the culture. They may have been raised in a group where empathy and altruism was just not what they did. Right. So never crosses their mind. And it becomes this is a thought that I'm just getting. It becomes this mass of darkness that weighs everything down. Mm-hmm. That there is this dark cloud over a large group of people, that they can't be empathic and they can't help other people and do all that, except for, as Phil Oakes said, a small circle of friends. But looking at it for a larger group, unless it's a catastrophe, and then everybody shows up with their boat or their truck or whatever it is and does what needs to be done, but on a daily basis, not so much.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very dense energy that you're talking about, and a great heaviness with people. And, many of the people, we call it, in the shamanic world, soul loss. And that when, there's many ways, we can't truly lose our soul, but we can have parts of us that feel like they're lost or that we're dissociative from. And so that soul loss, becomes so heavy in people's lives. It starts in probably for some in utero, and it's definitely in childhood, and as growing up in the world around us. But if something doesn't happen to wake us up, or if we lose that consciousness too early on, then there is a life that feels rather meaningless. And when something feels meaningless, if our lives feel meaningless, then we will continue to seek meaningless activities. And yet those meaningless activities that you were just talking about sometimes begin to feel so heavy and so depressing that it can create enough pain to help people wake up.
Right.
You know that from working in the field of addictions. Sometimes people get tired of being sick and tired, and that's their wake up.
Well, the whole stream of darkness in the world is basically like organized crime, theme and variations. And so, we know some of them and say they're terrible, trafficking children and assorted other things. But I grew up, did I grow up? I don't know. But when I was younger, I lived in a big city where organized crime was just part of the background, and watched what they did, which was basically terrorism. It was intimidating people into being involved in things that they knew were wrong so they wouldn't get hurt. And there's some of that that's overt and some of it that's really subtle that I don't think most people even look at or think about. But there is a whole lot of stuff in the world that's manipulative and designed to basically steal people's energy, time, and money. And, if that's all you know, and that's what everybody around you does, and you just think that's the only thing that there is. So a lot, one of the things I do remote work, and I do a fair amount of work on people. And there's an energy pattern that's caused by abuse of any kind, abuses that scale from abandonment through verbal violence, physical violence, sexual violence, whatever it is. And 30 to 50% of the people that I look at have the pattern. And when I ask the question, I get the story. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's just everywhere.
It's more the norm than not.
Right. And it follows family lineages and certain communities and all kinds of things. And it's the thing nobody talks about. And it's, I look at it all the time, and at least I can do something for the people that show up in my world. But every time I see it, I go, oh no, not again. I see what's going on here. And people are always surprised that I ask the question and I explain to them what the mechanics of it are. If you're a helpless, terrified child, this is what happens. And they go, oh yeah, right. Okay. That makes sense. But and then there is a version of that, which is working in a place that you hate and being mistreated. Yeah. And repeating the trauma, and, being in relationships that are not safe and are abusive, and repeating the trauma. So it's, so lost. That is so lost,
And we would
Right.
people find themselves caught in a loop. And, it's like like I'm thinking about years ago when we had records and they would hit a scratch and a glitch and it would just
Right.
play the same thing over and over and over. And so there's a loop in the psyche that happens and when soul loss happens. And, if you can look at it, whether you want to look at it as literally or figuratively, it's as if a part of your soul gets knocked out of your being and just disconnected and it's just
Right.
circling around in this loop in this lost space. So a big part of the work that we do is help those parts return and help that disassociation become integration. And, and of course with that, one of the reasons a lot of times people don't bring those parts back is because of the trauma associated with it. Because frequently when you bring it back, the full memories and body sensations and catharsis comes along with it, which is very healing to cry or to scream. The work we do with shamanic breath work, people sometimes have to throw up, they cry, they scream, they thrash about, all kinds of things. And then all of a sudden it's like they're a newborn lying there with this glow, almost a halo around them as of innocence and beauty and love surrounding this, this being who's just done this powerful work with, being facilitated. We call it really like midwifing that process.
Right.
And bringing those parts back. But when those parts are missing, there is soullessness. And when people feel that parts of them are missing, then like what you said, they don't have the empathy for anyone, let alone themselves. Even if they do kind of have a kind of a love or a codependency or a caring, it's not empowered, and there's not an ability to do anything. And people like that then repeat the patterns. They get caught in the patterns of being abused, or themselves, they also become abusive in some way.
Right.
And that perpetuates. And I've seen that working in this field, really for 40 years now. I've seen it repeatedly as well. And that's why I was concerned in working in the mental health field that so many people were being medicated that didn't need to be medicated, that just stopped them in the tracks of their healing. And even some of the people who did need some medication didn't need to be as heavily medicated as they were, from my perspective. And that it felt to me that while there were those of us who cared about individuals who were working with them and trying to bring in these new ways of helping people, that in many ways the systems were actually making them worse or keeping them stuck.
Right.
And, so I think it's really important that, people like yourself, myself, and the work you're doing with your broadcast and the remote healing that you're doing, the work we do through our, we've trained literally at this point hundreds and thousands of people to do breath work, to do ministerial work out in the world, and to bring back this more integrative, holistic healing, and to take, but it's got to be in the next octave. A lot of people are going to the indigenous world for healing, which is wonderful, and at the same time, there's a way in which we need to move it forward so that anyone can receive this kind of transformation and support. And that's really what about Soul Whispering is about. It's about how to make it available to everyone.
Well, I so honor your work, and I want to hear more about it when we have a chance to do that. Pretty amazing thing that you put together.
Well, thank you.
It's quite wonderful. This is important understanding for people to be able to bring into the world, and thank you so much for doing what you do.
And thank you too, David, for all that you're doing. And these are the times that we were born for. I really believe we're the ones that we've been waiting for, and that all of us, to the best that we can, if we do have feel our souls somewhat intact, need to step up and out.
Yeah, as the Chinese curse goes, may we live in interesting times, right?
Yes, absolutely.
We certainly are living in interesting times, getting more interesting all the time. So you have this new book out and you have the school going. What else is going on that you want to share with people?
Well, we have, for those individuals, we have a lot of people actually who want to come and do the training from out of the country or from the other side of the country and who can't come to, 8 different events over the course of 2 years. This is a ways off. But every year in May, we offer a month-long training. We had 30 students this past year from around the world who come to our retreat here in the mountains and go through the training, become a minister, ordained minister, and a breathwork, certified breathwork facilitator. And then they can turn all that into a degree if they would like to. But definitely they can do that. So that month long, if they go to shamanicbreathwork.org and go to our events page, they will see that month-long training. And they will also see a variety of mystery schools and workshops that I teach around the country in Sedona and California. I'll be back out in Sedona 2 or 3 times next year. In Portland and Seattle. I'll be in San Francisco in March. And several events back here at where I live, my Loveland Home Retreat in Western North Carolina. And we have other something else that I love to do at least once or twice a year. I take people on shamanic mystery tours. And I always think of it kind of like the Beatles' magical mystery tour. But I take people to really cool places and shamanic places, and we do breath work there, and we go see sacred things, and we have a good time together, and we breathe together. So this year I'm taking people to Egypt in December, but that trip has been sold out for a year and a half. But next year I'm taking people, this will be my 3rd trip back to Peru to be with the Andean shamans there, to go to Machu Picchu, and to be doing breath work in the Andes. It's amazing. I've done it twice now, so we'll be doing that next fall, and we'll be going to Bali and Australia next December in 2018. So people can go on and check regularly to see what kind of adventures we're taking around the world. We've been to Africa, we've been to Bali, we've been to Europe, we've been a lot of places. Egypt,
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. So, Star Wolf, this happens frequently with wonderful guests, but we're running out of time.
Oh, okay. That went quick.
I know, it always does. Let's give people your web address again.
Okay. It's shamanicbreathwork.org, and the organization is Venus Rising Association for Transformation. It's a nonprofit university and training program and transformational program. We also have a Transformation House program for individuals who would like to come to transformation instead of perhaps going to more traditional mainstream sort of treatment kind of programs. So we have an in-house thing that we do here that's a 2-week program for people. And lots of other good things. I will just quickly throw out here that I have another new book coming out next year, co-authored with Carly Matamore, that has to do with the African shamanic mysteries,
Wow.
the 31st Meridian. And I'm working on another book called Awaken the Shaman Within, which may be out next year, too, if I can complete it.
Fantastic. We will have to have you on again when those come out.
Well, that sounds great, David.
Thank you so much for being on the show. My guest has been Star Wolf, and thank you so much. So good meeting you.
You too. I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Sounds like fun. And if any of you are curious about who is this guy David and what in the world does he do, you can go to househealing.com. There's many ways to contact me, including a link to schedule a 20-minute free phone conversation to assess how my work might be helpful for a person, place, business, situation, whatever it might be going on. If you want more about the show, that's hiding at thefarkasfiles.com. And the whole archive of 6 years of shows is there. But you can also access all that with the Empower Radio app, which comes in flavors for both kinds of smartphones. And that lets you access all the shows with the full archives for each of them. And Empower Radio has people on 24/7 doing amazing shows. So check that out. One of the amazing things about this time technologically is that it's so easy to tune into all of this stuff and do it whenever it's convenient for you. As I like to say, anywhere, anywhen. So figure out which of the shows are interesting and you be able to listen at your convenience. So there we go. Another show. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, because otherwise it would be silly to be here by myself. This is David Franklin Farkas for the Farkas Files. The truth is in here somewhere on Empower Radio. Have a fantastic week.
Yeah.